Maria Ellis was the first to die alone, untouched, and without a single clue. Logan Price followed, found in his bathtub with music still playing. By the time Susan Vickers slumped over her desk, it was clear something unseen was stalking the people of Oak Ridge. 5 deaths, no suspects, no evidence, just a trail of silence and a terrifying truth buried deep in one woman's forgotten research. Oak Ridge had always been a place that seemed untouched by the chaos of the outside world. Nestled between thick pine forests and winding backroads, the town was known for its slow pace and simple living. The kind of place where everyone waved at each other and grocery store clerks knew your name. But all of that changed on an early October morning when a local jogger made a horrifying discovery behind the old, abandoned train station. The body of Maria Ellis, a 28-year-old kindergarten teacher, was found lying in the grass, her arms by her sides and eyes staring up at the overcast sky. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no indication of how she had died. Her face was strangely peaceful, her clothes clean, and there was not a single mark on her body except for some light bruising on her wrists. The initial investigation led nowhere. Toxicology reports came back clean. No drugs, no alcohol, no poisons. Her health records showed no medical conditions. The police interviewed co-workers, family, and friends. No one reported anything unusual in the days leading up to her death. There were no threats, no enemies, no secrets. Maria was well liked and lived alone in a small apartment near the edge of town. Her death was eventually ruled as undetermined, and without evidence or motive, the case faded into silence. 3 weeks later, the town was rocked again. Logan Price, a 32-year-old mechanic, was found dead in his apartment bathtub. His body was discovered by his landlord after neighbors reported a strange odor. The water had long drained, leaving him lying flat on the porcelain, eyes open, skin pale. Like Maria, there were no signs of trauma, no cuts, bruises, or defensive wounds. His phone was still playing music on the bathroom sink, and a sandwich sat half-eaten in the kitchen. It was as though he had just dropped dead in the middle of an ordinary day. Toxicology reports were once again clean. No explanation, no answers. The police began to question whether these deaths were somehow linked. There were no signs of forced entry at either scene. Both victims lived alone. Both had no history of illness or criminal activity. The town coroner was at a loss and described the deaths as bizarre, clean, and utterly without precedent. People in Oak Ridge began locking their doors for the first time in years. Rumors swirled. Some blamed a gas leak. Others whispered about poisons or strange experiments. But with no cause of death and no suspects, fear began to settle over the town like a fog that wouldn't lift. Despite public concern, authorities urged residents to stay calm. They insisted there was no evidence of foul play and no reason to panic. But no one felt safe. Something invisible and unknown had entered their peaceful world, and no one could predict who might be next. The question lingered everywhere from school parking lots to church pews: what exactly was happening in Oak Ridge? Winter came early to Oak Ridge that year, and with it, the third unexplained death. Susan Vickers, a 41-year-old school librarian, was found slumped over her desk in the early hours of a Monday morning. The janitor had been the one to discover her, arriving to clean before students returned from the weekend. At first glance, it looked as though she had simply fallen asleep, but she was cold to the touch, her eyes open, and her wristwatch had stopped at precisely 17 a.m. Once again, the scene was eerily calm. No sign of a struggle, no physical trauma, and no cause of death that made any sense. Police arrived quickly, sealing off the school and launching a third investigation that, like the others, led nowhere. Toxicology found nothing. Her health records were clean. Her co-workers described her as quiet, intelligent, and kind-hearted. She lived alone, had no history of depression, and there were no signs she had been harmed or taken her own life. Just like Maria and Logan, Susan had simply died for no reason that anyone could explain. The coroner called it another case of sudden, unexplained death. The phrase was becoming all too familiar. This time, residents began to speak more openly about their fear. Parents pulled their kids from school. Some locals left town for the holidays and didn't return. A town that once felt warm and welcoming now felt cold and watchful. News outlets outside of Oak Ridge picked up the story, labeling the deaths as part of a small-town mystery. Interviews with local police aired on regional stations. Theories flooded social media, everything from toxic mold to government testing to a serial killer who left no trace. But still, There was no proof of anything. It was during the quiet weeks that followed Susan's death when a possible clue emerged. A young officer named Diane Mercer had been reviewing case files late one night and noticed a detail that no one else had connected. All three victims had lived, at one point in time, in the same apartment complex, Ridgeview Flats. They hadn't lived there at the same time, and their apartments had been in different buildings, but the connection was there. It was the first pattern that gave investigators something solid to pursue. The complex, located just outside the town center, had a mix of long-term tenants and temporary renters. Police combed through maintenance records, tenant histories, and service calls. Nothing alarming stood out. They tested the water and air in each building. Results came back normal. No chemicals, no dangerous materials, no biological threats. Still, the fact remained 3 people had once lived under the same roof, and all 3 were now mysteriously dead. The discovery brought a brief wave of hope. Maybe they were closer to understanding what was happening, but that hope faded quickly. No new evidence appeared. The trail went cold again, and just when the town thought it couldn't get worse, 2 more deaths would push the mystery even deeper into darkness. Spring arrived in Oak Ridge, but the change in season brought no comfort. The town had barely begun to recover from the shock of 3 unexplained deaths when 2 more struck, seemingly at random. The first was a 45-year-old dentist named Thomas Keene. He was discovered early one morning by his assistant, sitting upright in the dental office's lounge with a cup of coffee still in his hand. The scene was identical to the others: no wounds, no drugs, no signs of distress. His expression was blank, frozen in a calm stillness. Just like the victims before him, Thomas had no known health issues, no enemies, and no clear reason to die. Only 6 days later, a delivery driver named Carla Mendez was found dead in the cab of her parked truck. Her body was discovered during a routine inspection of the fleet yard. She had arrived back from her route the night before and never clocked out. Her coworkers assumed she had left and gone home. When they opened the truck door, they found her sitting behind the wheel, as if waiting for a light to turn green. There were no visible injuries, no damage to the vehicle, and nothing in her system to suggest an overdose or illness. The pattern deepened, but so did the confusion. With 5 victims now, all completely unrelated by profession, social circle, or age, the town was desperate for answers. Investigators broadened their search, rechecking earlier files and re-interviewing witnesses. They reviewed hours of surveillance footage, combed through electronic records, and mapped out the victims' routines. But the randomness of the deaths made the task impossible. There were no overlapping schedules, no shared locations in the days before they died. It felt as if the deaths were being chosen by something that defied logic. Amid the chaos, one resident stepped forward with a theory that sparked new interest. Walter Lind, a retired geography teacher and longtime resident, had been tracking the locations of each death on a map. As he added the 2 newest incidents, he noticed something unusual. When he drew a line connecting each location, it formed a rough curve surrounding Oak Ridge's central water tower. He presented the idea to the local sheriff's office, suggesting that something in the environment, possibly airborne or waterborne, might be responsible. Investigators conducted new tests around the water tower and surrounding area. Samples of soil, water, and air were taken and sent to state laboratories. Results again came back normal. There was nothing to explain the deaths. No toxins, no contamination, no chemical presence of any kind. Frustration grew. Walter's theory was dismissed by some as coincidence, but others in town couldn't shake the eerie feeling that the map was trying to say something. With public trust fading, the town council requested help from state officials. More resources were deployed, but they too found nothing. And just like before, the case slipped into silence. 5 people were dead, no clues, no suspects. And the question that haunted everyone remained unanswered: what force had chosen these victims, and why was it still hiding in plain sight? The investigation had nearly stalled when a forgotten name reappeared: Kara Monroe. Her name surfaced during a routine background check on mail records. Each of the 5 victims had, at one point, received mail from the same P.O. box number. It wasn't active anymore, but records showed it had once belonged to Kara, a former chemist who had died in a car crash 2 years before the first death occurred. She'd lived in Oak Ridge for most of her life and had worked at a private laboratory just outside of town. That alone didn't raise suspicion until officials dug deeper. Kara had been quietly dismissed from her job for reasons that were never publicly disclosed. Confidential internal documents from the lab, accessed through a court order, revealed that she had been reprimanded multiple times for unauthorized experiments. The nature of her research was vague, but it involved synthetic compounds and neurological response testing. When questioned, the lab's current director claimed no knowledge of what had become of her work after she was terminated. They assumed she destroyed it or took it with her. Her death had been ruled an accident, a single vehicle crash on a foggy night. No signs of tampering, no alcohol involved, just her alone in the car. But now, with her mail linked to 5 victims and her secretive work emerging from the shadows, investigators obtained a warrant to search her old home, which had been vacant since her passing. The small house on Willow Creek Lane was overgrown and silent. Inside, dust coated every surface. In the basement, behind an old shelving unit, detectives discovered a locked metal cabinet. Inside were Kara's journals, handwritten formulas, lab notes, and sketches. There were maps of Oak Ridge marked with red circles. Some matched the victims' homes, others pointed to areas near the water tower. One chilling entry read, "If proven stable, the results will be untraceable, invisible, death by nothing." Among the files, several small vials were found, each labeled with different sequences. Most were empty. One had shattered. Forensics tried to analyze the remaining contents, but deterioration over time made it difficult. No conclusive results came from the samples. Still, the implications were clear. If Kara's compound had been released, it might explain every death. But one question lingered: how had the compound been delivered, and by whom? Kara was dead before the deaths began. Had she set something in motion before her crash? Or had someone else found her research and continued it? Investigators searched for signs of a collaborator, but nothing surfaced. No fingerprints, no records, no digital trail. Just the chilling possibility that something Kara had created lived on after her, still quietly moving through the town. After Kara Monroe's research was discovered, the town braced for the worst. Residents feared that more deaths would follow, that the mysterious compound might still be circulating, undetectable and deadly. Security around the water tower was increased, and Ridgeview Flats was evacuated for further testing. Hazmat teams combed every inch of the properties she had marked on her maps. Air, soil, and water samples were retested with more advanced equipment, but once again, the results came back clean. Nothing harmful was found. No chemical residue, no biological agents, nothing that pointed to a living threat. Weeks passed, then months, but to everyone's surprise, the deaths stopped. No new cases emerged, no unexplained passings. For the first time in over a year, Oak Ridge felt quiet again. Though many hoped this signaled the end of the nightmare, others were more skeptical. Some believed the compound had run its course, dissolved in the air or neutralized over time. Others believed it had been deliberately turned off, as if someone had decided the experiment was complete. The FBI eventually took over the investigation, combing through Kara's background and correspondence. They traced old lab contacts, co-workers, and even her university professors. No one had any idea she was working on something so dangerous. Her personality had always been described as quiet, brilliant, and deeply private. Her journals hinted at paranoia and a need to prove control over fear. It appeared she had no clear target in mind. Her victims may have been chosen by proximity, timing, or by pure accident. Or perhaps it was all part of a test to see if she could create something invisible, something that could kill without anyone knowing how or why. Despite the mounting circumstantial evidence, no conclusive proof tied Kara to the deaths. Her vials were degraded, and none contained active samples. There was no delivery device found, no video evidence of her planting anything. Without a living suspect, without a method, and without physical proof, authorities could not classify the deaths as homicides. They remained officially listed as unexplained. Eventually, the FBI closed the case. Oak Ridge held a public memorial for the 5 lives lost: Maria Ellis, Logan Price, Susan Vickers, Thomas Keene, and Carla Mendez. A stone monument was placed in the town square, etched with their names and the simple phrase, "Gone without cause, never forgotten." Walter Lynn's map, along with Kara's journals and files, were sealed in evidence storage. Some residents still request their release through public records, hoping to uncover more. Conspiracy theories thrive online. Some say Kara had an accomplice who is still out there. Others believe her death was no accident, that someone silenced her and took her work. A few think it was all a coincidence, and science simply hasn't caught up yet. But for most in Oak Ridge, The story remains a chilling mystery, one that left behind no suspect, no justice, and no peace. Just silence, and the unsettling knowledge that sometimes the dead don't leave answers behind.